In this video, we are going to go through a lightning quick summary of the basic rules for the Assassin's Creed board game. The Assassin's Creed board game is designed to be played over several sessions, but if you're like me, you may not be able to game too regularly and may once in a while need a little rules refresher before your next gaming session. So I made this video to cover the most important rules that you will use about 90% of the time. First thing we're going to do is set up the map as well as the enemy board and compass board. Just follow the diagram in the campaign book, but do pay attention to tiles with walls as well as the tower orientation, which can be easy to overlook. You can then set up the assassin board and then set up the HQ and start with the headquarters assignment step. During the HQ step, you will have to split the available allies and assassin apprentice models into two groups, namely the memory group and the HQ group. Models in the HQ group can be assigned to the various rooms to obtain certain benefits, namely healing from the hospital, crafting in the workshop, upgrading the HQ through the command room, and items from the shop. As for the memory group, only models assigned there can be called upon during the memory. For our group, we usually like to try and put as many as we can into the shop to increase the chances of getting useful items such as the town crier or smoke bombs, and also stock up on crafting materials for blueprints. On the other hand, we tend not to prioritize the command room as contracts will always be fulfilled in the second attempt. Do note, however, that even though it is an automatic success, you still have to put enough minis to fulfill the second attempt. With the HQ prepared, we can now begin the memory. Each game turn is broken down into these 4 phases. During the event phase, refresh the white action cubes for each assassin and draw an event card which imposes an effect during this game round. Next is the assassins phase, where assassins may act one at a time in any order. The most common actions are as follows. Assassins can move 1 square per action cube, but do note that they cannot move diagonally. Assassins can also attack by spending 1 white action cube. When attacking, roll the number of dice indicated on the weapon card. Rolling a star is a hit, and rolling the assassin symbol can be considered a critical hit, where you also apply special effects of the weapon, if any. An attack fails when you roll the crossed swords, which will prompt an enemy retaliation, which is a free enemy counter attack and also cause the assassin to be exposed. An enemy who is killed becomes a body, and the body may be searched by assassins for loot. Using 1 action cube, firstly remove all bodies on the square and draw as many equipment cards as there were bodies. Do note that you stop drawing cards if you hit an investigation card. You can also save an action cube by placing it in the plus portion on the assassin board, which is a very useful skill. This saved action can be used either as an additional action in your next turn or as an out of turn action during the enemy's phase. Now I'm gonna summarize the main stealth mechanics that you will use throughout the game. Your assassins will always begin the game incognito. They need to be incognito to do various things, including opening chests, entering hiding spots, completing objectives, and using fast travel stations. The exception to this is if there are no enemies in the square, cause it's stealth if there are no witnesses. An assassin will lose their incognito status and become exposed in 3 main scenarios. The first scenario is if they take a detection test and fail. Assassins must take detection tests if they move onto a square with enemies and roll 1 detection dice for each enemy. A detection test is failed if you roll the eye icon. If the alert state has changed to red, you also fail a detection test if you roll the eye and bell icon. Assassins must also take a detection test if enemies move onto their square. In this case, 1 dice per enemy will be rolled for each assassin. The second scenario where assassins can lose their incognito status is where they use loud weapons. Loud weapons are indicated by the symbols on their card. Lastly, assassins are also exposed if they suffer a retaliation from a failed attack. If an assassin is exposed, it can go incognito by moving into a space with no enemies. When that happens, you ditch the exposed marker on the arrival square. But remember that exposed markers do attract guards, so you gotta get out of there as soon as you can. You can also go incognito by using certain card effects such as the smoke bomb. Apart from assassin personal incognito status, there is a separate overall alert status signified by the bell icon. The alert status is changed if an assassin is exposed in one of the 3 scenarios mentioned earlier, or if a guard finds a body. Guards that move onto a square with bodies must make a detection test for each guard that has moved onto that square. Remember that you roll only for guards that move onto the square, not for guards that are already on the square. Do remember that the alert state is different from the incognito status of your assassins, and the alert state doesn't change even if all your assassins are incognito. There are very few ways to change the alert state, so you're going to want to avoid changing the alert state as far as possible to avoid having the board flooded with guards. Once the assassins are done moving, it's time to move on to the enemies phase, which is broken down into 3 main sections. In the enemies reinforcement phase, new enemies will come onto the board in the indicated reinforcement squares. The number of reinforcements are shown on the cards drawn from the reinforcement deck. After reinforcement, the enemies will then start to move. The first thing to look out for is whether there are any exposed markers on the board, and if there are, nearby enemies must move toward them. Otherwise, check the direction of the event card and all enemies will move 1 square in that direction. If it is a question mark, just cut the event deck and get the direction from there. The order of enemy movement starts from the row of squares of the side indicated. Enemies will not move if they are blocked by a wall, the destination square already contains 4 enemies, the destination square is a roof tile and there is no ladder, they are locked on one of the 3 slots on an objective base, or they are on an exposed marker. Once movement is done, it's time for enemy combat. Enemy combat is initiated if there is an exposed assassin on their own square or a nearby square if the enemy has a ranged weapon. All enemies that have an eligible target will make 1 attack each. Enemy attacks will be resolved in groups based on the squares on which they are on and not as individual models. All enemies on a square will prioritize targeting their own square first if eligible. If there is more than 1 eligible target square, the player will decide which square should be targeted. Enemies will then attack by rolling the number of black dice indicated on their card. The black dice will be split among the assassins on the target square. The roll of a starburst is a hit, and the assassin will lose 1 red cube for every hit. On the other hand, the roll of a shield will mean a successful defense. Now we've reached the end phase where you will check to see if you have achieved the memory objectives, and if so, the memory is complete as soon as all assassins have left the map. If not, remove all exposed markers not attached to assassins and then move on to the next game round. And with that, we have covered all the basic rules of the game, which you will be using about 90% of the time. And while this is not a complete look at every single rule in the game, the rulebook and campaign book does do a pretty good job of explaining the rules as events happen, so you can refer to them as and when you need it. I would recommend that you give the rules a read in any event, and you can find the latest version of the rules at the Triton Noir website. Let me know if this has been helpful for you in the comments below, and if you are looking to paint the minis in the game, do check out my other videos here.